Okay, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And welcome to another welcome to another week of community development. This week we'll we'll discuss a couple of techniques for community engagement that how do I put this? That can help them or these communities to find solutions to any issue or problem that they are facing. Well, actually, the techniques that I'm about to discuss with you guys today is to help you facilitate communities so that they can come up with a solution to their problems, if that makes any sense. And the techniques that I'll be talking about this week or in this session are result based management and logical framework analysis. A little bit of a disclaimer: both RBM or results based management and logical framework analysis or LFA are quite similar in are quite similar. Well, they do have similarities, um, with a difference in, I think, in the workflow or in the overall approach to things. Anyways, here we go. Well, before I go on, please do mark your attendance if you haven't done so. You can see the QR code on screen, or otherwise, it'll pop up again another once or two times as the class as the session progresses. So, as I mentioned, both RBM and LFA are very similar in the sense that both are techniques that provide a framework for strategic planning, strategic thinking, and management based on experience or lessons learned or based on learning and accountability. Now, both techniques rely on realistic goal settings and objectives. It shouldn't be goals; there should be objectives right here. Sorry, it's not realistic goal setting and goals, but it's realistic goal setting and objectives. And then and both techniques also rely on project monitoring, um, and both require constant monitoring to achieve their goals, to achieve their objectives, and ultimately to achieve the overall goal. And as this is as both techniques rely heavily on experience and lessons learned, then throughout the course of the project, um, there are opportunities, or um, there are moments or opportunities to reflect on lessons learned throughout the project as an overall input for decision making. Now, the decision making process here is not just the decision making at the end, or the decision making for the to come up with the solution of a solution to a problem, but also the decision making with regards to the objectives and the goal settings and so on. So it could be a minor decision. It could be minor decision making, and because there is a reciprocal process where or you there is a reciprocal process, giving the opportunities of all the stakeholders to learn new things throughout the process, then perhaps there might be some adjustments or some how do you call this? There might be some adjustments or some shifts in the objectives that have been set, and the goals that have been established, and so on. So the objective of RBM, or result-based management, is to provide a coherent framework for strategic planning and management based on learning and accountability in a pretty much decentralized environment. What I mean by a decentralized environment is that the communities that use RBM, communities that use RBM, or communities use RBM to be able to come up with a very specific and a very contextual solution to their problem, a very localized solution to their problem, and they're not reliant on authorities that are perhaps on above them in a governmental or in an administrative hierarchy. So that way, again, they can come up with a very specific and very specialized solution that works according to whatever problem or whatever issue it is that they're trying to clear up, and within their means, or within their capacity. So what RBM does basically is, or RBM in a community setting aims to improve management effectiveness and accountability by defining realistic expected results, monitoring progress toward the achievement of expected results, and integrating this an element of lessons learned into the management decisions and reporting on performance. So basically, RBM is based on 4 pillars that you can see on the slide. So the first pillar of RBM, and LFA for that matter, is the definition of strategic goals, which provide a focus for action. So, for example, if you happen to live in a community, or if you happen to work with a community who are trying to, or who are trying to increase literacy rates, for example, and so perhaps you know that literacy is the issue within the community, adult literacy, for example, and ideally, to overcome the literacy issue, is that you would provide, say, for example, community libraries. You would establish community libraries where members of the community can borrow books for free, and perhaps even provide a tutoring service in that library to help enhance the community's literary capacity. So that is the overall goal. And so you break down that goal to establish the community library by setting strategic objectives, or strategic goals, or small sub goals, or smaller goals. You maybe you need to find an ideal spot for the library within the community. If it's a densely populated settlement, densely built settlement, then where are you going to put the library? So first order of business might be to establish or to decide on a location, to see if there is an ideal location within the community for the community library, and then after that is done, the second order of business would be where the book's going to come from. Is it going to come from the community? Will there be an attempt to reach out to other communities, or perhaps to reach out to authorities or the government for donations? And then the third order of business might be to decide on who is going to manage this facility, who is going to manage, who's going to run and maintain the facility, and how are they going to get paid? If they do get paid, is it on a voluntary basis, and so on and so forth. So these are the smaller goals, or the objectives to achieve the bigger goal, which is to establish a community library. That's what I meant by defining strategic goals, which provides a focus for action. And then the second pillar is the specification of expected results, which contribute to these goals and align programs, processes, and resources behind them. Second pillar is, I think, the second pillar depending on the scope and scale of the project that you're bringing to the community. But I mentioned the three orders of business of finding a location. The expected result is pretty straightforward. You expect to find a location. Perhaps you might add even who's going to build it, and so on. So these three steps. First order of business is to one. Second order of business is B. Third order of business is who's going to run, who's going to manage, who's going to maintain. So these three objectives, you can already imagine what the expected results are, and you can also see how these three objectives, or how these three smaller objectives, contribute to the overall goal, and how it aligns to the program. If the program was to, for example, to increase literary capacity, or to improve adult literacy, then that's how you make an argument for, we're going to improve adult literacy by establishing a community library, so on. And so the processes and the resources really depends on the process and resources go hand in hand. How you determine, for example, in the case of the community library, how are you going to determine the location? Is it going to use an existing building, or is it going to be a new structure? That really depends on the resources that the community has, and of course whether they have the technical capacity to support the processes of actually providing the facility, and so on. And throughout the three steps, you would of course need an ongoing monitoring and assessment of performance, or monitoring and evaluation. And then perhaps as you progress through each stage, as you complete each objective, you might find that finding a location wasn't exactly as easy as we had thought, or maybe finding the books weren't exactly as easy as we thought. We should have done this, we should have done that. So you can you can reflect on the things that you learned, the lessons that you learned, or the stuff that you pick up throughout the process, and perhaps even adapt your approach to it. For example, once you determine the location, once you determine the location, once you know the size, the capacity, the physical capacity of the building, you might think, oh, the community library is going to be big. It's going to contain, I don't know, 10,000 books or so. But once you come up with an actual location, with an actual physical building, then you think, oh, 10,000 books aren't going to fit there. We need to fit in at least one or two computer units in there to help the librarian catalog our collection and to keep track of who's borrowing and whatnot. So you might dial it down and say, all right, 10,000 books is too much. Maybe with the physical location or with the physical structure that we have right at the moment, we can only expect to accommodate 5,000 or 3,500 books. So that's I think that's how I would illustrate the integration of lessons learned into future planning. Of course, future planning with regards to the community to the community library project. But of course, if you happen to be working with a community, and then you will be working with another community on a similar issue, then perhaps the lessons that you learned from this project can be translated into future projects and the future plan and the planning of future projects, for example. So once you've established or once you've increased the literacy rate or the literacy numbers in one community, and you move on to the next community, you're trying to replicate the same thing, perhaps and the next community happens to have the same or similar characteristics. Both communities that you've been working with are situated or live in a densely populated, densely built areas, and so you reflect on what you learned from the previous community and you translate it here. We're not going to have as many books. The people who are going to work in the community library, so the librarians and the other staffs, they're going to be voluntary based because this is a community library. It's a non-profit thing, so everything has to be done on a voluntary basis, unless, of course, you can secure funding from other resources and whatnot. So that's point number 3. And fourth pillar is improved accountability based on continuous feedback to improve performance. Basically, with RBM or with any technique, with any community engagement techniques for that matter, it's a good idea. I think it's a rule of thumb. The first rule of thumb is that you should maintain a steady stream of communication with the community, or at least with community representatives that you're working with, because that way you're providing accountability, and the community will view you. They will see you as an accountable person, and your organization as a transparent organization that are pleasant to work with, and of course, the community will always provide you with feedback. You shouldn't do this. You can't do this. You can do that. Within our community, and perhaps there are values within our community that you can or cannot bend or cross. So the community will continuously give you feedback. You will also ideally continuously communicate your progress with the community or any kind of setbacks that you might be having with the community. So I think pillar number 4 does not only pertain to RBM or LFA, but accountability and feedback, I think, is inherent or should be the first or should be the first pillar in all community engagement techniques or community engagement efforts, community engagement programs. So, RBM, simple description of project and causal relationships. So there are two. I think there are two approaches or two elements to RBM. There are vertical elements and there are something called horizontal elements. More on that a little later. And so basically, what I think not only RBM but LFA as well, both RBM and LFA have vertical elements and horizontal elements. So they're basically like matrices if you put them together. And what I mean by vertical logic is how one item or one objective flows to another vertically, and how you should clarify, and that will help you clarify the rationale of things, and whether the design of your approach is logical. But yeah, there are three main elements here. There's goals, purposes, and activities. So the goals or objectives, whatever you might want to call them, is, for example, establishing a community library, and then you would need to verify your goal with the purpose of the facility. For example, you're dealing with literacy issues, so your goal is to establish a community library. What is the purpose of the community library? The community library's purpose is to provide the members of the community to accessible books, and giving them access to reading materials would improve their literacy. So the purpose then justifies the goal, and then the activities. What are the activities associated with, or what are the activities associated with the fulfillment of the goals? For example, I mentioned about finding an ideal location, the resources, and then the staff, and then staffing, and then after that, you would need to verify. You would continuously need to verify the goals, purposes, and activities. I think. Now, come to think of it, if I put it this way, it doesn't really make sense much. But I think further along this session, I'll demonstrate what I mean by vertical logic and vertical and horizontal elements. So the vertical elements are the goals, the purposes, and the activities. So for example, the goal, what is the ultimate developmental reason for the project? And the project should have a single goal. So the goal, let's just continue with the with the literary illustration that I gave you. So the ultimate developmental reason for the project, for the establishment of a community library, is to improve literacy rate, to improve literacy among adults within a community. That is the single goal. And purpose, what is expected to be achieved if the project is completed successfully. It could either be one of three: to introduce, to improve, or to expand. For example, the purpose of our project, the purpose of our community library is to improve. Number two, to improve adult literacy among members of the community. It could also be, for example, if you were to try to educate a community who maybe have zero literacy, have zero literacy levels, then the purpose of your community library is to introduce literacy to the community, and you'd have to argue and state the urgency of introducing literacy to the community. For example, I think I remember stories. I remember stories of rural communities who are so remote to who are so remotely situated that they are completely segregated from other civilized settlements. From other civilizations. That didn't come out right. From other civilizations that they have absolutely no idea what's going on, and some people would try to take advantage of that by giving them illegible or unreadable contracts. Unreadable because, of course, they don't understand what's going on in the document. And they would try to buy off. People would try to buy off their land or farm off of their land for a very, very small fraction of the price, simply because these people can't read. I think I remember one of the. This is a story that my friend told me, that she came across a very tribal community, and one of the community leaders said, we want to be able to read. Can you please teach us how to read? Because every now and then we get people coming in, and they give us a piece of paper for us to sign, saying that, this is going to benefit the community, so and so, and then we sign it. But we give our fingerprint or thumbprint on it, without even knowing what's inside the contract. And the next thing we know is our houses get bulldozed, and we get displaced. They tell us to move away because we signed a contract. So my friend tried to introduce literacy, tried to teach them how to read, so that they can read contracts, they can read contractual documents, they can understand contractual documents, and they can argue against contractual documents, or they could support those contractual documents depending on the contents. Another purpose might be to expand something, to expand an operation, to expand an operation, or to expand a certain influence. If there is an influential community, I don't really have an illustration for an influential community. But for example, the expansion of a community's economical activity. Maybe I think not far from where I live, there is a small settlement small settlement. There is a kampong that identifies itself as a tempe kampong tempe, and of course, by the name, you can already guess what sort of activity is going on there. But this little kampong is actually a part of a larger kampong, a part of a larger agglomeration of communities. So it's basically a part of kampong something, and so. But they kind of identify themselves as being different to other parts of the greater community, because in that specific block, they focus or they concentrate on the production, on the production, packaging, and marketing and shipping of tempe. To other communities throughout East Java. So quite an operation they have. Just imagine if the demand for if their tempe is very, very popular. Imagine if there's suddenly an increase in demand and they need to expand their operation. So perhaps the purpose of the project is to expand their operation, and perhaps to negotiate with other parts of the community, other members of the other communities to allow them to expand, and so on and so forth, if that makes any sense. And then another the third element, the third vertical element is the activities. What are the actual deliverables of the project? They should describe the planned activities for each purpose. Again, coming back to the literacy case study, then the deliverable of the project is a location, the source of materials or source of books and equipment for the library, and then staffing. Those are the three actual deliverables or actual deliverables. So deliverables are basically deliverables can be defined as a product, as the product of an activity. Hang on. As a product of an activity. I have to look it up in the dictionary. So deliverable, a thing able to be provided, especially as a product of a development process. There you go. The product of a process. So as I mentioned, the process of finding, at the end, the product of finding a location is the location itself. A product of finding resources is the resources themselves. And a product of finding staffing is the staffs themselves. They should describe the planned activities for each purpose. So activities to reach the project's purposes are, like I mentioned, location, resources, and staffing, and so on and so forth. So that the number of activities really depend on the scope of the project, and there are no two projects that are alike. So it's a highly variable amount. So looking at horizontal and vertical elements, as I mentioned, we need to arrange them in a matrix. You're probably already familiar with the SWOT matrix and so on. So this time, this is the RBM matrix. where you arrange horizontal and vertical elements, and state just and state or express your goals, express your goals in writing. What is the ultimate developmental reason of the project, and then what the purpose of the projects are, and then here we have the activities. Here, what are the actual deliverables, and then the output of each activity. What are the immediate, visible, concrete, and tangible consequences of project activities? So, activity one. What is the result of activity one? The result of activity one should be written down here, and then what are the outcomes of those activities? Now, outputs are the immediate effect, or the immediate or concrete tangible consequence. It could be the immediate product, but when you move on to outcomes and impacts, then the outcome is more of a projected medium term effect if the project is successful, and perhaps projecting or anticipating what will change as a result of the project. And then when you talk about impacts, then it's a higher level, or perhaps a longer term effect or consequence of the project. So in terms of the community library illustration that I keep coming back to, you already know that the ultimate output would be the community library itself, but perhaps the outcome of the community library would be, say, the medium term effects, a 5% increase in literacy, and then the impact would be a 100% literacy rate among adults within a community. For example, it was previously 25%. Medium term would be a 10 to 15% increase, and then the impact would be 100% literacy rate among adults within a community. But that's how I illustrated that. So, but yeah, as I mentioned, we need to establish the immediate output. The outputs first, and then the outcome, and then finally we project the impact. So another way of looking at arranging the activities, the goal, purpose, and activities in an RBM process is to have a look at the design, steps. So this is what I meant by the horizontal and vertical elements. So first, from the goal should help establish the purpose. The purpose then should help establish the activities, and then once you've defined the activities, you would then move on to considering what the output, what are the immediate, visible, concrete consequences of the project. What are the deliverables there, and then what are the projected medium-term effects and the projected long-term effects. And that is one way, that is how you would plan it. But as I mentioned earlier, you also need to verify the logical steps of each component of the result-based management matrix. So what you need to do is you need to verify whether the activities that you're proposing actually introduces, actually improves, or actually expands, um, or actually the activities can actually help to achieve the project purpose, and ultimately the purposes would help to find or to reach achieve the project goal. And then once that is verified, then you can continue to verify again whether the activities and the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts are all aligned. And then once you can verify that the activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts are aligned, you can reflect on the projected impact and see or to see whether the long-term impact is actually in line or is exactly the same as the initial goal. So if your goal is to increase literacy 100%, or your goal is to increase literacy, and then you have a projected impact of of a 75% increase in adult literacy, then that means that your projected impact and your goal is in line. If that makes any sense. All right. Before I move on, would does anybody have any comments or questions? I know that I'm a bit I'm rambling back and forth a bit here today. So if anybody needs to clarify anything, or if you have a comment or a question, you may do so now. You're quick.
Yes.
Okay, cool. No? Okay. Well, maybe not now, but we'll we'll continue. We'll continue with the next point of discussion, which is the logical framework analysis. There are some tools, again, that are similar to LFA, log frame, which, to be honest, I've only seen log frame in action once. I'm not too familiar with either of them, but similar to RBM, they have a vertical. There's a vertical logic, and there are horizontal and vertical elements to. There are horizontal and vertical elements to the logical framework analysis. So the vertical components are, of course, it's very similar. What are the goals? What are the goals? What are the actual deliverables of the project? They should describe the planned activities for each purpose. And then, secondly, what is expected to be achieved if the project is completed successfully? And then the activities, the actual deliverables. Sorry, this is typo there. But basically, they're all the same, except that LFA also considers the inputs, the financial, the human, and physical resources that are necessary for carrying out the project activities, and thus ultimately achieving its purpose. So previously, you only have previously in RBM, in results-based management, you only have the goal, the purpose, and the activities. But you don't really consider the input as a separate entity. Whereas here, you consider the inputs as the fourth component. within the framework. For the horizontal components, well, here's the QR code for those of you who haven't marked your attendance or who joined in late. I know. I think a couple of days ago, the system crashed because of an upgrade or an update to the whole Presensi system. But anyways, coming back to LFA, the horizontal components describe the project results. There are three elements there: expected results, verifiable indicators, and then risk management. And then, contrary to RBM, this is a verification of horizontal logic rather than vertical. So, first of all, there's a it does look slightly different. There is a narrative summary of the goals, purposes, activities, and inputs, and then within each cell, you would need to state what the expected results are. You need to indicate whether there are verifiable indicators and the risk management aspects, or what risks are associated with with each goal, purpose, activity, and input. So if you put them all together, then I think each cell would look more or less like this. So what is the actual goal? What is the ultimate goal of the project? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are the broader, higher level, long-term or long-term impact or consequences of the project? And then these impacts, how would you measure these impacts? So in the verifiable indicator cell, you would need to express or state what the quantifiable and or perhaps qualitative indicators that will demonstrate goal achievement. For example, establishing a community library, then the quantifiable indicator is that there is a library. There's a community library. The community library is a physical structure, for example. Or if, for example, you're trying to provide accessible reading materials or accessible books to the communities. Perhaps one of the indicators of goal achievement would be 5,000 books, for example. Then that becomes your verifiable indicator. And then within risk management, there are assumptions and there are risk indicators. For example, what conditions must exist for the cause-effect relationship between outcomes and impacts to behave as expected, and what indicators measure status of assumptions above. And so basically, within risk management, for example, if you have 500 books as your indicator, as your verifiable indicator, that's a good solid number. 500 books. How would you get 500 books? So what's the assumption? Or you're trying to get 500 books within 3 months, then what conditions must exist for you to be able to achieve or to be able to collect 500 books within 3 months? Otherwise, what are the risks? For example, the risk, of course, is that you won't be able to collect 500 books within 3 months. And what are the risks associated with with gathering books for the community library. Well, one of the risks is that you would find difficulties in recruiting or locating potential donors. Um, if you rely on a donation rally, for example. Um, Goals, purposes, what's expected to be achieved if the project is completed successfully, what are the medium-term effects that's in the outcomes. Again, you have to state explicitly what the quantifiable and or qualitative indicators are, and the assumptions and the risk indicators. So the the biggest differences, I would say, between RBM and LFA are within the verifiable indicators and the risk management columns. Um, Again, it's difficult for I think it's difficult for RBM to include. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would say it's difficult for them to include risk management because they don't because RBM does not consider the inputs necessary to achieve the goals, purposes, and activities per se. So again, these are the horizontal and vertical components. The goal, impacts, purposes, outcomes, activities, outputs, inputs, and the use of resources. So in the inputs section, what are the financial, human, and perhaps even physical resources that are necessary for carrying out the project activities and achieving the project purposes? And then in the use of resources or the use of inputs, what and how would these resources or would these inputs be how would they be put to good use? So here are the similarities with the RBM matrix or the RBM context. And as I mentioned, RBM does not consider inputs. Here are the design steps to a logical framework analysis matrix. State the goals. The goals should help you formulate and state your purposes, and the purposes should help feed define the activities, and then of course what are the inputs needed to get those activities going, and then of course you need to verify after you verify the steps or the components vertically. You need to verify them horizontally by considering the impacts, considering the what the indicators are, and finally, once you've established the verifiable indicators, then what your assumptions and risk indicators are. Same with the purposes. Each purpose should help you formulate the outcomes, and once you've stated the outcomes, you should be able to state or establish the quantifiable. You should be able to identify or establish the indicators, and the indicators will help you identify assumptions and risk indicators. Same process for activities, output, and then inputs here, the use of resources, and then the types of costs or resources, types of costs associated with each resources or with each activities, and what are the target dates, and then of course finally it's the assumption and risk indicators that need to be established. So you can see how you can see what I meant by the vertical and the horizontal approach to the vertical and horizontal approaches to these matrices. And then once you've designed once you've established the design of your matrix, then you need to verify the logic by considering whether the inputs or the resources are relevant with the activities you're proposing, and whether the activities are relevant to the purposes, and whether your purposes are relevant to the goals. And of course, whether the input and the use of resources, or whether your resources and how you use or how you plan to use your resources is in line with the community's capacity, and whether the assumptions and the risk indicators are, or basically in the final box here, whether the risks associated with whatever resources it is that you're using for the goals of your project is acceptable. And same thing with activities and other parts of the other parts of the matrix. So if before it was vertical coming down, then it's now vertically verified from bottom up, and then once again horizontally verified. So yeah, this is an illustration of the relationships between the horizontal and vertical, the assumptions associated with this is a similar case study to the one that I use in my illustrations. It's about reading proficiency, about levels of literacy. So for example, this is using an if and then approach. So for example, if you run 5 summer reading camps, each with a capacity of 100 year 5 or year 6 students, if you run 5 summer reading camps and you get the parents of children with low reading proficiency, and if the parents of the children with low reading proficiency are willing to send them to the camps, then you get 500 students with low reading proficiency. Then you get 500 students with low reading proficiency to complete a summer reading camp. And so that is the output. And the outcome of these 500 students is the improvement of reading proficiency among children in grades 5 to 6 by 20% within 3 years. And then the ultimate goal of this outcome is a 10% increase in the number of grades 5 to 6 primary students that will continue on, that will be continuing to high school within 3 years. So if, the context of the case study on this slide is that the community is facing a decline in the number of primary school or elementary school students who continue on to high school, and they identified that one of the reasons that these kids don't continue to high school is that because they have low reading proficiency. They can't read very well. So to overcome that, to overcome that in the long run, you would be organizing and running summer holiday or school holiday reading camps, with the aim of getting 500 students to complete a summer reading camp. But of course, 500 students is assuming that parents are willing to send their children off to reading camp. The risks associated with organizing such a camp is that there will be parents who are reluctant to send their kids to reading camp, and therefore, once you've identified that risk, you can either come up with a strategy to persuade the parents to let their children join or attend summer reading camp, or perhaps perhaps a different approach for those parents. So that was the assumption and risk and associated risks. Sorry. Again, this is just an elaboration of the horizontal and vertical components. Previously, the activities were simply to run 5 summer reading camps, and the output would be 500 students with low reading proficiency to complete the summer reading camp. Here, the matrix has been elaborated a bit further with the activities to run 5 summer reading camps, each camp with a capacity of 100 students, and then that way, parents who are willing to send their children off the camp, they can send their children off the camp. But for the parents who aren't willing to, who are not willing to send their children off the camp, then the alternative solution would be to distribute reading at home kits or reading kits to parents of children either attending the summer camps or not attending the summer camps. And here the indicators are quite clear. If you're running a summer camp, then the indicator would be the number of camps run. If you're distributing kits, then the indicator would be the number of kits distributed. And how would you verify that? You would have, of course, summer camp documentations, summer camp records, and kit distribution records. And the output, 500 students attending or completing reading summer camp. And the other output would be 500 parents of children with low reading proficiency help their children read at home. With again a nice clear indicator. The indicators are the number of students completing the reading summer camp, so completing the full summer camp, not stopping somewhere in the middle, and that can be verified through summer camp attendance records and a number of parents helping. Could be measured or verified by distributing a survey of parents conducted at the end of each summer camp. In the risks and assumptions, then assuming that everything goes well, children apply what they learned in the summer camp, and that children are interested in reading with their parents. And so with that, the outcome of the 500 reading camps would be an overall improvement in reading proficiency among children in grades 5 to grade 6 within 3 years. And Again, the indicator is pretty straightforward. There are tests. There are tests to measure reading proficiency among children, and the means of verification would be a 6 monthly reading proficiency test using nationally accredited assessment tools, with the ultimate goal of this. And all of this is to ultimately achieve a 10% increase in the number of grades, in the number of primary students continuing on to high school over the next 3 years. And there are no risks or no assumptions of risks associated with the primary goal. That's all I have on RBM and LFA for this week. I thought that would actually take a little longer. That was quicker than I thought. So, if anybody has any comments or questions, you may unmute yourselves or raise your hand. Either way. Yes, Amira.
Firstly, thank you for the detailed explanation. You explained it thoroughly and provided various examples so I could understand it easily. I think this is interesting to understand about the LFA and RBM, as this is the tool in the project cycle management. I just want to ask, are there any specific conditions or factors that require us to use this RBM and LFA? Because I think these methods can be applied in various fields from the small to the large projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes.
I had almost the same question with Amira. Thank you, Amira, for that. And thank you, sir, for the explanation. So I also just want to add something from her question. Like, as planners, how do we evaluate or measure the effectiveness of RBM or LFA, and how do we get to decide which approach to use? Because I think it's wide enough, so it can be a little bit tricky for us to decide or choose which one to go for. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I saw Gary's hand up. Do you have a study? Do you have a question, Gary Baldi?
Yes,
sure.
I think it's the same with Peter about the when should we choose the LFA and when we should use the RBM.
Okay, great. That's a very good question, actually. How do we decide? Which tool or which technique or which approach to use? I think I've never really considered it, actually. So yeah, that's a very good reflective question for me too. But I think ultimately how you decide which approach or which technique or which tool to use, whether it be SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats, or stakeholder mapping, RBM or LFA, it really comes down to what is the ultimate goal of your project or of your activity. So, for example, if you're engaging a community, if you're engaging with a community and you're trying to come up with a strategy, for example, you're trying to come up with a strategy to overcome, or a strategy to or a strategic plan to help the community expand and develop their whatever potential they have. then the best tool to, I think the best tool, or at least this is the tool that I'm most familiar with, to come up with a strategy or strategic planning would be to use SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strategies, because, well, for one, I think other than a document or a report, there is no tangible there is no tangible products of a strategy, but there are outcomes and indicators, and that would come into performance indicators, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. As for there was SWOT, and then there's stakeholder mapping. Again, I think stakeholder mapping and stakeholder analysis would work really well if you happen to deal with NIMBYism. So NIMBYism, not in my backyard conflict cases, for example. I think we talked about. I think we had this. I think we had the simulation a few weeks ago, with the windmills. With the windmills, that's it. Sorry, with the windmills. That's an example of NIMBYism, and with such situations, you would try to get to know your clients or the community a bit better, and you would try to map out which parts or which members of the communities have greater strength and greater influence than others, and which of them are silent stakeholders, and so on. So with RBM and LFA, I think it's, if you have a more with RBM and LFA would be if you have a longer, I think if you have a mid to a long term goal in mind, like this particular case study that I happen to have in front of in our screen at the moment. With the context or the background of the background situation of this project is that the community is worried that they're worried because children don't want to continue on to high school after they finish their elementary education. So, but they realize that this is not as easy as flipping your hand. So what they had in mind is that okay, we can't do this in a year or two, so let's try to increase the number of elementary school level graduates who continue on to high school. So within 3 years, let's see if we can get a 10% increase in the number of students to continue to high school, for example. So with that sort of goal in mind, then I would say the community engagement tool to help them plan, to help you facilitate them in finding and formulating a solution would be RBM and LFA. And again, it depends on the objective. I think it also depends on the duration, the orientation of the projects, And again, that is a question that I haven't really that I haven't really thought of much yet. So again, it's a very good reflective question for me as well. Because most of the times I would just resort to SWOT. But yeah, again, coming back to summarize all that. If you and your community are trying to come up with a strategy to come up with a strategy to solve a problem, then of course you would use SWOT analysis. If you happen to come across a NIMBYism conflict situation, then stakeholder mapping and stakeholder analysis would help you identify, and then afterwards you might resort to SWOT analysis to formulate a solution that everybody can agree on. And then if the project or effort entails a provision of a product, a provision of a facility, or perhaps if the project entails a tangible or a visible goal such as this, then RBM and LFA would be more suitable. I think we all realize that there is no such thing as what is the best method of all, because there is no such thing as the best method overall. It really depends. I think every method, every technique, every approach has their strengths and weaknesses, and other than their objectives, other than the project objectives and the project orientation and the context and the context of the situation, I would say your familiarity with each technique would also come into consideration when you choose a technique or approach to engage the community. And with that, what are the performance indicators of each technique? Performance indicators overall, I think, are if you can establish a perfectly clear performance indicators, for example, like these: number of kids distributed, number of summer camps, number of parents, number of students, and reading proficiency. If you can come up with indicators such as that, using any indicators such as that, regardless of the technique that you're using, then it would be easy. It would be very easy to. It would be not very easy, but it would help you a lot with determining whether the approach that you have chosen, is suitable or unsuitable, and whether you need to make adjustments along the way. For SWOT analysis, I would say the key performance indicators that would help you measure the success of a SWOT generated strategy would be any indicator that would be any indication that you have minimized the threats, and that you have addressed the weaknesses that you identified. And then with Yeah, I think again, because I'm most familiar with SWOT, then I think those are the indicators that I could provide an example for RBM and LFA. Again, that depends on the project, but I guess it would be, I guess, ideally, or it would be easy or easier for you and for your stakeholders if the indicators that you choose are quantifiable, are tangible. That that is not that does not necessarily mean that qualitative indicators should be avoided. No, I think qualitative and quantitative indicators should go hand in hand. For example, if we look at this number of kits distributed and kit distribution records, you want to distribute 500 reading at home kits to parents of children attending summer camps. And then you look at the kit distribution records and you think, okay, well, all 500 kits have been distributed. Well, hey, well done. Awesome. That's good performance distribution-wise. But then you want those 500 kits to help parents teach their kids to read at home. I think output number 2 here in this matrix is a bit more difficult to measure. Therefore, the means of verification would be to survey the parents or to interview the parents at the end of each summer camp, or perhaps you give them some time after the summer camp. Give them time to let them get themselves or let them familiarize themselves with the reading kits that you've distributed, and say maybe 30 days after the summer reading camp, you could conduct interview sessions with parents to see how the kits that you distributed have helped them, if they use them at all. So I think performance indicators for each method and for each situation varies greatly. So there is no set example or a template for establishing these key performance indicators. But I guess the rule of thumb for any key performance indicators, regardless of whether you're engaging with the community or you happen to be managing a big project, a rule of thumb for performance indicators is that they should be tangible, measurable, ideally. If these indicators are qualitative, then you would need a different approach to measure these indicators. You would need to interview your stakeholders, and throughout the interview, then you would need to use qualitative analysis methods to unravel the results of the interview, and find the keywords that you're looking for, the positive keywords that you're looking for, of course. So yeah, I hope that answers, since the 3 questions were very similar. I hope my explanation there have helped clarify your questions. Thank you very much for the thumbs up, guys. Does anybody else have any questions or comments regarding regarding what I have delivered today? If not, again, I thought that this would take. I thought that this would. This is going a bit quicker than I thought. I was thinking of doing this, and then we'll do an RBM or an LFA simulation next week. But yeah, if there are no, I think we'll just stick to that plan. If there are no further questions or comments, with regards to the course contents this week, I'd say thank you very much, you guys, for the questions and for the discussion that have taken place. I really appreciate the reflective question on how to choose a more suitable method. Again, it's a question that I don't really ponder very much, and what you guys asked and your questions have led me to think that okay, I should rethink some of my approaches now, and try to come back to basics. Again, for those of you who haven't marked your attendance, please do so. 110774 is the code, or you can alternatively you can scan the QR code that is on the screen right now. Thank you guys very much for attending today's session, and I'll see you all next week for a simulation. Yes, Amira.
Would you mind to share the presentation?
Sure. With that, I think I should double check again if I have forgotten to. I may have forgotten to upload some of my previous slides. My mind has been all over the place lately, but yes, I will share these. I will share the recordings as usual, and I will share the slides. And I actually have some reading. Materials for RBM and LFA that I need to upload, and I will upload them. As soon as this session ends. So thank you for reminding me, and thank you again for your kind attention and for your time. I will see you guys next week. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, sir.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. See you guys.